While the world outside moved on, inside the walls of the Daramola home, a strange sense of peace had taken hold. Zara's absence was treated not as a loss, but as a welcome relief. The room she once called hers, small, dim, and cold, had been transformed into a dumping ground. Old suitcases, broken electronics, torn curtains, and forgotten belongings were carelessly piled into the space she used to cry herself to sleep in. No one hesitated, no one asked. It was as though she had never lived there at all. Mrs. Daramola walked through the house lighter on her feet, her voice no longer sharp with irritation. "That girl was nothing but bad energy," she would mutter when speaking with her church friends or gossiping neighbours. Since she left, this house has been calm. But the calm was only on the surface, because when no one was watching, when the nights grew still and the house quiet, a different expression would settle on her face: guilt. It flickered only for a second before she masked it again, because admitting regret meant admitting she was wrong. And Mrs. Daramola was never wrong. Mila, on the other hand, thrived. With Zara gone, there was no one to compare her to, no one to do the chores, no one to clean up after her mess. She slept in, spent her days lounging around in silk robes, scrolling through her phone, painting her nails, and practicing TikTok dances. Meanwhile, her mother worked twice as hard, sweeping the floors, boiling water, cooking meals, washing clothes. Tasks she hadn't touched in years were suddenly hers again. Because Mila always had an excuse. "Mummy, I just got my nails done." "Mummy, I have cramps." "Mummy, the detergent makes my skin itch." And Mrs. Daramola, she grumbled under her breath but never protested aloud, because deep down she knew. She had driven Zara away. The one who had quietly managed the house, the one who had cooked their meals, who had swept their floors, who had ironed Mila's clothes, who had scrubbed the bathroom, even when she was exhausted. Now the house was peaceful, yes, but it was also messy, disorderly, loud with complaints, but empty of responsibility. Every corner of the home echoed with Mila's entitlement and Zara's absence. And though no one dared speak her name, it hung in the air like forgotten perfume. Because while they told themselves she was just the adopted one, the servant in disguise, deep down, a tiny voice whispered, she was the one who held this house together, and they let her go. The news hit the compound like a slap on a Sunday morning. "Zara, your husband has been arrested." It came from Mama Peace, of course, the self-appointed Minister of Information Gossip Department. Zara had been sitting quietly at her fruit stand, slicing oranges, when Mama Peace came wobbling down the narrow path, headscarf halfway off, voice shaky with the thrill of drama. "They say he beat up a powerful man, one big ogre. Police carried him." Zara's knife slipped from her hand. "What?" "As I'm talking to you now, they said it's serious. Big man with money and power. You better go see for yourself." Her blood ran cold. Without thinking, Zara wiped her hands on her wrapper, grabbed her keys, and sprinted toward the house. Whispers followed her as she passed. "Ah, that girl's suffering never ends. Is that not the man she married out of pity? So now she'll go and beg for his release. How pitiful." But Zara wasn't listening. All she could think was, "Not Nathan. Please, not Nathan." Zara's feet were dusty, her wrapper slightly stained from fruit juice, and her heart beat like it was ready to burst out of her chest. She didn't care how she looked. She didn't care what people were saying. All she cared about was getting her husband back. "Please, I just want to see the man. Just let me explain," she begged the security guard, who stood tall, arms folded, his face blank. She clutched her handbag tightly, her fingers trembling. "They said he fought someone powerful. They said the man lives here. My husband isn't a bad person. Please, let me just speak to him." The guards exchanged glances. Her desperation was loud. Her voice, though shaky, held the kind of sorrow that couldn't be faked. Finally, after a tense moment, one of them sighed. "Follow me." Don't cause drama inside. Zara nodded quickly, wiping her eyes with the edge of her wrapper. She didn't even realize her legs were shaking as she followed him into the mansion. And then, the doors opened. She stepped into a grand living room that looked like something from a luxury magazine. Polished marble floors, tall chandeliers that glittered above her, wide glass windows that stretched toward the ceiling. Zara stood awkwardly at the center of it all, her eyes scanning the space, searching for the powerful man she had come to plead with. And then, she saw him. Standing at the far end of the room, leaning casually against a marble column, was Nathan, her husband. Only he wasn't the Nathan she knew. His hair, freshly cut, was styled in a smooth fade. His beard was perfectly trimmed and lined. He wore a rich emerald green suit, tailored to sculpt his body like it was designed just for him. Underneath, a crisp white shirt peeked through, and a sleek black tie hugged his neck. On his wrist sat a gold timepiece that gleamed beneath the chandelier lights. His shoes were Italian leather, shining like mirrors with every step. Zara's jaw nearly hit the marble floor. She forgot how to breathe. "Nathan," she whispered, stunned. He turned to her fully now, his eyes calm, a soft smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Zara." She blinked fast, still trying to understand. Her tears that had once been out of fear and sorrow now turned into pure confusion. I came to beg the rich man. I thought," she stammered, her voice cracking. Nathan slowly began to walk toward her, every step echoing in the vast space. "You did come to beg the rich man," he said gently. "You just didn't know he was your husband." Zara's lips parted. She couldn't move. She couldn't speak. All she could do was watch him, her heart pounding, her mind spinning. She had run barefoot to defend a man she thought had nothing, and walked straight into the arms of a man who had everything. The dining room was quiet except for the soft clinking of cutlery. A gentle aroma of grilled fish, coconut rice and fried plantains hung in the air, yet Zara barely touched her food. She sat across from Nathan at the long polished table, her eyes fixed on him, studying him like he was a puzzle she'd been handed without instructions. "So," she said, breaking the silence, "everything I thought I knew about you was a lie?" Nathan set his glass down gently, his voice calm. "Not everything, just the part I needed to hide until I was sure." Zara tilted her head slightly. "Sure of what?" He gave a small, sincere smile. "Sure that you loved me for me. Not for the money. Not for the house. Not for my name." She lowered her fork, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. "But Nathan, I was with you when we barely had anything. Bread for dinner. You wore the same 2 shirts every week. I stood by you because I thought we were struggling together." "And we were," he replied gently. "Because if I never showed you that side of me, I'd always wonder if your love was real." She exhaled sharply. "So what if I had left? What if I hadn't stayed?" Nathan leaned in slightly, eyes soft. "Then I would have known you weren't the one." Zara looked away for a moment, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Do you know how crazy this is for me?" she whispered. "One day I'm peeling oranges in the compound, next day I'm eating dinner in a house with marble floors. Married to a man who's not just rich, but powerful." He reached across the table, gently covering her hand with his. "You don't have to understand everything tonight," he said. "Just believe this. I chose you, not despite what you went through, but because of it." Her eyes flicked to his. "So, this is all real?" "Every bit of it." She stared at him for a moment longer, then gave a small, tired laugh. "You're still full of surprises," Nathan grinned. "Dinner's not even over yet." And for the first time that evening, she smiled. Not because everything made sense, but because the one thing that mattered finally did. After their quiet dinner, Zara sat in stunned silence, still dressed in her faded blue gown, the one that had survived her worst days. Nathan stood, wiping his hands on a napkin, and walked over to the window. Without turning, he said calmly, "It's time." She glanced at him, confused. Time for what? He turned around, pulled out his old button phone and held it up with a smirk. One last call. On this, he said. He dialed the number and Zara's heart skipped. The line rang once, twice, then a familiar voice answered. Hello? Nathan straightened. Good afternoon, sir. It's Nathan. I'm calling to formally request to come this Friday to pay Zara's bride price. There was silence, then the familiar scoffing tone. Ah, so you've grown some sense now? Good. Come Friday. Bring whoever you want. Nathan ended the call, slipped the phone into his pocket and looked at Zara. It's set. We're going to your father's house. She stared at him, blinking. Like this? She looked down at her worn-out dress. I can't go there like this, Nathan. I'll be a joke. Again. Nathan smiled and nodded toward the bedroom. I know. That's why I had something made for you. On the bed lay a beautifully tailored outfit. A royal blue lace dress with gold embroidery, fitted perfectly to her size. Alongside it were elegant gold sandals, a matching purse and a delicate head wrap. Zara's eyes widened. Nathan, when did you... The day I knew I'd marry you properly, he said softly. You won't return there as the girl they threw away. You'll return as my wife. Zara felt the lump rise in her throat as she ran her fingers over the dress. It was bold, elegant, regal, everything she had never been allowed to be. And now, she was. Friday came. Zara stepped out of the black SUV first, her new outfit hugging her beautifully, her head held high. Nathan followed, wearing a richly embroidered wine-coloured agbada with a cap to match. He looked powerful, nothing like the man who once came to beg for shelter. The neighbours outside gasped, whispering, Is that not the same girl they said married a broke man? See how she's glowing. Mr. Daramola came out expecting a quiet visit. What he saw was a convoy of luxury cars, security escorts, and a version of Zara he barely recognized. The gate swung open with a low creak, revealing a scene the Daramolas never could have prepared for. Mr. and Mrs. Daramola stood at their doorstep, frozen in place. Their mouths slightly parted, eyes squinting against the glare bouncing off a sleek black convoy parked outside their compound. This wasn't the arrival of a struggling son-in-law. This looked like royalty had shown up by mistake. Nathan stepped out first, calm, composed, wearing a wine-coloured agbada embroidered with gold thread that shimmered under the afternoon sun. Every step he took screamed wealth, confidence, and vengeance, served cold. Good afternoon, sir, he said, his voice cool, polite, yet it carried the sharp weight of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. As I said over the phone, we're here to do things properly. I've brought my people to request Zara's hand, officially. Mr. Daramola opened his mouth, but the words jammed in his throat. His eyes flitted past Nathan to the man beside him, a regal older gentleman in a flowing white agbada, his posture straight, his face unreadable. You're Chief Dyke? He stammered, barely above a whisper. Chief Dyke gave a subtle nod. Yes. And this, he gestured to Nathan, is my son. Boom. Just like that, the air shifted. The weight of everything they had done, the insults, the neglect, the cruelty towards Zara, came crashing down like bricks. Mrs. Daramola's eyes darted to the daughter she'd cast aside, only now Zara didn't look like the discarded child they once pitied. She looked untouchable. Dressed in a flowing royal blue lace gown, intricately detailed and hugging her figure with effortless grace. Her skin glowed like polished bronze under the sun. Her hair was swept into an elegant bun, her makeup soft but regal, her posture tall, proud, as if she'd been born into this world, not dragged through it. Mila stood near the window, frozen mid-breath. Zara. That's Zara? The same girl she used to boss around? The one she'd mocked for wearing the same old slippers every Sunday? The one she and her mother had treated like a glorified housemaid? Now she stood beside a man who looked like he could buy and sell everything in sight, and Nathan. My God. Mila's eyes dropped to his wrist. Was that a Rolex? His suit looked custom-made. His presence alone made every other man who had walked into their compound look like background extras. And the way he held Zara's hand, gently, like she was something priceless, was the worst slap of all. Mr. Daramola was still staring, blinking like he'd seen a ghost. Meanwhile, Nathan scanned the space with polite disinterest, and then his gaze met Mila's. Briefly. No emotion, no spark, just a passing look like she was no more important than the curtains behind her. Mila felt something twist deep in her stomach. Jealousy, confusion, regret. Maybe all three. She clenched her fists. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Zara was the adopted one, the burden, the one they managed. Mila was the prize, the chosen one. But now, she was background noise in Zara's triumph. Finally, Chief Dyke's deep, commanding voice broke the awkward silence. "Shall we sit, Mr. Daramola? We have traditions to honor and a bride price to settle." That pulled Mr. Daramola out of his daze. He straightened his shirt, cleared his throat, and motioned them inside, stumbling slightly over his own pride. As Nathan guided Zara into the house, he leaned close and whispered into her ear, "Let them watch. You're not returning as the girl they abandoned. You're walking in as my queen." And Zara smiled, not out of arrogance, but quiet satisfaction. Because finally, they knew. As the Daramolas stood by the door, watching the well-dressed guests step into their compound, Mr. Daramola managed a stiff nod. His voice was composed, but there was unease in his eyes. Yes, please come inside," he said, gesturing toward the sitting room. Mila stood quietly in the corner, her chest rising and falling with each breath. Her eyes stayed fixed on the woman entering the house, her sister Zara, now radiant, no longer the girl they once treated as an afterthought. She looked completely different, yet somehow entirely the same. As everyone settled, Chief Maxwell Dyke, dressed in his flowing white agbada, gave a respectful greeting, his voice deep and deliberate. Nathan remained close to Zara, his presence steady, every movement calm and purposeful. And then, the moment of truth came. The bride price was revealed. Box after box was opened. Bundles of crisp naira, rows of fine gold jewelry, colourful luxurious fabrics, cartons of imported wine, special gifts for the elders, and hand-selected tokens of honour. The Daramolas watched in stunned silence. Mr. Daramola's lips parted, but no words came. He hadn't expected this. Not this much. Not for Zara. His hands shook ever so slightly as he exchanged glances with his wife. Mrs. Daramola could hardly believe her eyes. She had never truly considered Zara as someone deserving of such value, but now, watching the gesture unfold before her, she felt a weight settle in her chest. Zara remained seated quietly, her hand in Nathan's. There was no pride in her posture, no arrogance, just peace. Her journey hadn't been easy, and yet here she was. Nathan turned to her briefly, his eyes full of admiration, as if to silently remind her, "You deserve this." Mila, who had always been the one praised, favoured, and adored in their home, felt something she hadn't expected, a quiet ache in her heart. Not because she envied her sister, but because she was realising how deeply she had misunderstood her. As the final items were set before the family, Chief Dyke gave a soft nod of respect. "We hope this speaks not just of our intentions, but of how much we value the one we have come for." There was no loud celebration, no exaggerated reaction, just a long moment of silence that said everything words could not. When the formalities ended, Nathan rose and reached for Zara's hand. She stood beside him, elegant in her blue gown, the same one he had gifted her. Before leaving, she turned to face her family, Mr. and Mrs. Daramola, and her sister Mila. There was a time she would have longed for their approval. Today, all she needed was peace. "Thank you for everything," she said softly. Her voice was calm, free of anger. As Zara and Nathan stepped out of the house, the silence behind them was deafening. Mr. and Mrs. Daramola remained seated, unable to move, their faces drawn with something they hadn't felt in years: guilt. The weight of their choices pressed on them. The insults, the neglect, the way they had turned their backs on a child who had asked only for love. "We misjudged her," Mrs. Daramola whispered, her eyes misty. "We threw her away, and she still turned out better than we ever imagined." Mr. Daramola didn't respond at first. He simply stared at the door Zara had walked out through. "She didn't deserve what we gave her," he said quietly. There was no anger left in him, only regret. Mila sat to the side, unable to meet anyone's eyes. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the one being admired. She wasn't the one being chosen. And the realization stung in places pride couldn't protect. Later that evening, as Zara and Nathan were preparing to leave for their home, Mr. Daramola came outside. He walked slowly, hesitantly, like a man who knew he was too late but couldn't bear to stay silent. "Zara," he called softly. She turned, her eyes calm. He stood before her, eyes lowered. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to say I'm sorry. For everything. For not protecting you, for not believing in you. You've made us see ourselves clearly. And it hurts." Zara's gaze didn't falter, but her voice, though quiet, held strength. "You don't need to ask for forgiveness, sir," she replied. "What you gave me was pain, but it became the fire that refined me, and now I choose peace." Mr. Daramola nodded slowly, his heart heavy. Nathan stepped beside her and gently took her hand. Without bitterness, without resentment, Zara gave a faint smile. "Goodbye, Dad." They walked away, not just from the compound, but from the past. Final lesson. Sometimes the apologies come too late, but healing is not about hearing sorry, it's about rising, stronger, even when no one believed you would. Thank you for watching this powerful story of pain, love, and redemption. If it touched you, please like, comment, and subscribe for the next part. Your support means the world to us.